Operation Phantom Fury, also known as the Second Battle of Fallujah, was fought over a 6-week period beginning on November 7th, 2004. It was the bloodiest battle of the Iraq War and also the heaviest urban fighting for U.S. Marines since the Battle of Hue, Vietnam, in 1968. The lead up to the battle began in March of the same year when 4 American military contractors were killed in an ambush. Their bodies were dragged through the streets, set on fire, and eventually hanged from a bridge leading into Fallujah. These atrocities triggered the first Battle of Fallujah in April of 2004. The Marines assaulted the city but would eventually be pulled out because the Iraqi government complained about the toll on civilians. After the American withdrawal in May, foreign fighters converged on the city. There was this hodgepodge of fighters from different countries, led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. They spent months training and setting up defensive positions, which turned Fallujah into the epicenter of the insurgency. This was a serious threat that required a response. So over 10,000 Americans, along with 2,000 Iraqi and 850 British troops, engaged about 3,500 to 4,000 insurgents in a brutal street fight. The insurgents wanted to die as martyrs, and the Marines were happy to oblige. In an interview after the battle, Abu Ehab, a 30-year-old construction worker from Fallujah, said this, quote, "We didn't want the occupation and we didn't want terrorists, and now we have both. I didn't think the Arabs would be so vicious, and I never thought the Americans would be so unmerciful." Today, as we remember the 20th anniversary of Operation Phantom Fury, we've got a special guest on the show. We're talking to Chris Wilkens, who served as commander of 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines during the Battle of Fallujah. Chris, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I was glad that our mutual friend Andres introduced us a few years ago, and glad to have you on the show, man. We'll just go ahead and jump into our questions if that works for you.
Sure does.
So can you tell us about your childhood?
Yeah, sure. I was born in the Bronx, spent about the first 9 years of my life in an area called Yonkers, which is just north of the Bronx in southern part of New York State. And then when I was 9, we moved up to a small town called Brewster, New York. It's about an hour north of the city. Grew up there, pretty much a very, I would say, I would assume it's a middle-class town. Or I would say that our senior year of high school, when everyone had their driver's license and could drive to school, the senior parking lot was all crappy cars. So everyone had a car, but it was a piece of junk for the most part. It was just a small, middle-class town. And then I went to school in upstate New York in Ithaca and did 4 years there. And that's where I did the summers of officer candidate school while I was in college in Ithaca.
Oh, that's nice.
So they have the standard recruiting offices go through high schools to get personnel to enlist. And then for the officer side, they have what's called an OSO, an officer selection officer. You're probably going to hear a lot of acronyms throughout this conversation.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll just ask the question about it if you use an acronym. So you can spell it out. So just let it fly.
And you got it. And that officer, the OSO, he or she has like a set number of colleges in their AO, and Ithaca College was one of them. And so I'd contacted the OSO my freshman year of college because I knew it was something I'd wanted to do, was join the Marine Corps. And I guess we're being honest on this. To go to OCS, you had to be in good academic standing at your college. And my first semester, I was just below a 2.0, so I did not meet the requirements to go to OCS. Then I got my grades up the second semester. And then after my sophomore year of college, which was the summer of 2000, that's when I did my first summer at OCS. OCS can be different depending on what type of commissioning program you go through. So if you are a Marine option and an NROTC unit, you're doing a lot of things throughout the school year in your ROTC unit. And then for a 6-week OCS session in between your junior and senior year, you go to OCS for that. I was not part of an ROTC program, so I did the 2 6-week sessions, 6-week of PLC juniors, platoon leaders class juniors. And then the summer of 2001, I went back and completed PLC seniors. And then I went back to college for my senior year in fall of 2001. And then when you graduate, that's when you end up getting commissioned. So I graduated OCS in July of 2001 and then got commissioned in May of 2002 when I graduated.
Oh, wow. So you were in college on September 11th, 2001.
Yes, I was.
Yeah. So you still had the option then to opt out. You're part of that crew that knew we were going to war and decided to proceed. So much respect.
You know what was also on at that same time? I mean, obviously, I don't need to go into like the feeling of patriotism in the United States after 9/11, but yeah, it certainly made this is becoming more of a real thing. But when I had first started to meet other U.S. Marines and I'd thought about the military as a potential career option, it always seemed like something I'd wanted to do. And then the more I'd met other Marines and read about the Marine Corps, it just felt like this is an organization I want to be part of. And then when 9/11 happened, it's like, of course I want to be part of this organization. You know, it almost kind of made me want to do it more.
Nice.
In a way.
Yeah.
You know, because you saw what people who want to hurt this nation and hurt American citizens, you saw it.
Right.
And so, yeah, definitely, it just reinforced the reasons I was joining in the first place.
Yeah. Awesome. After 9/11, I'd already been out. I was in college. Actually, I just graduated college and 9/11 happens. I'm in the workforce. I started calling the Marine recruiters. I want to get back in. He was like, how much do you weigh? And I said, well,
it's none of your business.
Can I get a waiver? Do you guys have maternity camis I can borrow? I said, no. But that was, anyways, a lot of my former platoon mates were in the same boat. It was like you couldn't get back in because the lines for the recruiters were just, they were beating down their doors. And so a lot of guys joined the National Guard and deployed. So it was a pretty wild time. The nation was together at that time. It was nice. I mean,
sure was.
It wasn't nice. It was a heartwarming thing to see people come together in that bad time. So it was good.
Yeah. In the worst of times is when you see some of the best of people.
Yeah.
And it was certainly something that was uniting, for obvious reasons.
You kind of alluded to this earlier, but when did you actually say, I want to be a Marine?
So I was born in 1980, but the movies I saw were they're recruiting commercials. I mean, it's Top Gun, it's Commando, it's Predator, it's all that stuff. I was a fan of Star Trek, and that's had a military rank structure, and they worked as a team, and they did cool stuff. I don't know if the military actually used them for recruiting, but I think they had an impact on at least my generation. And I will say my family also had a lot of respect for military service.
Right.
My grandfather, who I never met him, he passed away before I was born. But he had served in the German army in the early 1930s, because that's what he had to do to get out. Then he came here, served and joined the U.S. Army in the 30s. But also he went to boot camp, and then he didn't really have any money to train troops, so he basically just went home. And then after Pearl Harbor, he got thrown in jail for a little while, like a lot of German immigrants did, and Italian and Japanese immigrants as well. And then he got called back up in 1944. So he went through boot camp like 3 times. Is what I'm getting at. Once with the German army and then with the U.S. Army twice. And so military service was very well respected in my family. And my father, I think, had always wanted to join, but he turned 18 in 1969. And from my understanding, the public support for the Vietnam War really turned negative after the Tet 68 operation. So I think a lot of people probably around that time had thought about service. I just had that happen. Maybe didn't want to. Anyway. So my family, I thought very highly of it, and it was probably something I had looked into. But then in high school, I was part of a junior ROTC in my high school, and there was a Navy captain and there was a Marine major. And Navy captain was a great man, but the Marine he was special. There was something about the guy. He was an artillery officer from Vietnam. I'm sure he had seen his fair share of bad days. And I would say the thing about him that really stuck out to me was he was tough, but he cared. He was the type of leader who's like, you'll quit on yourself before I ever quit on you. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be nice to you. But I'm doing it because I care.
That's cool.
And I understand some people may have some toxic bosses who just say, I do it because I care, but they just like being rude to people. Yeah. He was definitely not that guy. He was just a good man. And the more I had read about Marines and whatnot, I'm like, this is something I want to do. And I told my dad that, and he's like, can you just go to college first? And I was like, yeah, but can I join the Marines after? And he's like, I don't care what you do after. Just do college first. And I was like, fine.
That's cool.
And then that's when someone told me, yeah, they have officer recruiters. Just contact him when you get to school. And that's
cool.
And that was, 98. and then going to OCS in 2000. So it was like a slow burn getting into like the Marine Corps. You know, you do one OCS summer, then you go back to school for a year, another OCS summer, back to school, and then you get commissioned, but you don't check into Quantico until November 2002. So
Right.
it was kind of a long path, but
Yeah, but I think that's a good program with the way they do OCS in the summers. When I was at NC State, I met some MECEP Marines. That's the Marine Enlisted Commissioning and Education Program. And they're active duty, but their job is to go to school, and they sent them to OCS in the summers. And by the time they graduated, they were already second lieutenants, ready to go to TBS and all that stuff.
What I had mentioned about the Marine ROTC options, they do the 6-week OCS summer in between their junior and senior year. I believe, and again, I'm basing my information off over 20 years ago, so certain things may be different now. But I believe the MECEPs, they went to OCS pretty much right away, right after their first year of college. Because I guess you don't want to pay for them to go to school for 3 years if they're not going to graduate OCS.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, most MECEPs I don't think are going to have they're not dropping out of OCS. They kind of know what they're getting into at that point.
Yeah, but that makes sense. Make sure they're going to be able to make it. And so I think the MECEP guys also had a prep school that they sent them to. But yeah, it was cool. That was such a good program. But
it really is.
Talking about OCS, so this is for our enlisted listeners. I was an enlisted Marine, so my experience was much different than that of an officer. From what I understand, though, in OCS, they're looking for leadership ability, and you can get dropped at the drop of a hat, right? How was that?
The only way I can really compare it to recruit training at Paris Island or San Diego is what the prior enlisted Marines have told me in comparison. So from what I've gathered, I mean, there's a lot of overlap between OCS and recruit training. It's a whole lot of, let's see how chaotic we can make this and make sure they realize it's not about them, you know? So it's the same that you're living in squad bays and very, very strict rules about cover and alignment, how the racks are made, giving you a lot of stuff to do, not a lot of time to do it. Whole lot of stuff like that is very similar. The things that are different is I've heard that discipline is more important at recruit training, and whereas OCS, it's more of like kind of sleep deprivation and you don't get as much time to sleep, and whatever stuff you have to plan for the next day, you're doing it at night when you should be sleeping type of thing. And they put you in kind of billets throughout. Every couple of days you rotate, like someone's a team leader or squad leader, platoon sergeant, platoon commander, or company gunny.
That's cool.
And you're also not prepared for any of those roles either.
Yeah.
You know, so it kind of forces you in a position where you have to screw up. And frankly, that's exactly what it should be.
Right.
Put them in charge of kind of simple tasks like marching these people to a chow hall and adhering to a schedule.
Right.
Well, yeah, it's a whole lot like drill instructor yelling type stuff. But after like the first several weeks, I think the drill instructors are kind of like, you know, they'll be on you if you screw up, but hurry up. Don't waste time. Get to where you're going. And as long as you do things correctly, I mean, they're still there. They're still drill instructors, but they're not trying to see if you're just instant obedience to orders is always a good thing, but like we're presenting you with problems. Can you actually handle and address these things?
Right.
So I think OCS it's a great job interview to see if people can handle stress and whatnot.
Yeah.
And some of the differences, like at recruit training, I believe there's smoke pits and sand fleas and stuff where they just kind of PT you a lot.
Sand pits, yeah. So we got thrashed a lot, yeah.
So the PT events at OCS, which I've heard are more challenging, they're also like timed events of like pass and fail. And if you fail one, you do get remedial. But then if you fail that one, I do believe you are kicked out or given a chance to be recycled. As far as the whole like kicking people out right away, that is from my understanding. I was never part of the OCS staff. I'm just telling you as someone who went through the school. Right. If you're ever considered like an integrity violator, like cheating on an exam, cheating on land nav, lying about something, that's the type of stuff that'll get you kicked out immediately, as it should be. But for the most part, it's a lot of like graded events, and they're not supposed to like physically thrash you because then you could perform poorly on like a training event like the endurance course or something like that. But what they are allowed to make you do is if you drop your rifle, you have to do 20 push-ups. That's kind of standard. But it becomes, if you screw something up, the drill instructor's just like, I think I heard your weapon drop twice you know, which basically means do 40 push-ups. And so you start doing them and you're counting them and you're like 19, 20, 21. And he's like, no, start back again at 1. I can't have you do more than 20, just in case like the colonel's walking by. He can't hear anyone counting more than 20 push-ups. So you have to start back at 1.
That's fun.
Anyway, so yeah, that was the OCS experience.
Yeah, there was a staff NCO that he was my platoon sergeant and he went to OCS. So he had a college degree. He went to OCS. He got dropped because he was an integrity violator. He was on one of the runs. Officer training was vastly different, I would say, because you guys, they were putting you in these different leadership positions because you're going to be leading Marines. Not all enlisted guys are going to be leading Marines. So our experience was a little bit different. But my friend, he told me about this. So they were on one of these timed runs and he emptied his canteens so he could have less weight. And they caught him and they dropped him. There was like, you have empty canteens, you're done. They booted him and he was like disenchanted. And anyways, he ended up enlisting and became a staff NCO and he retired. But he said, I just wanted to be a Marine. But integrity violations, not cool.
Yeah. And I could see why too, because the whole time you're in like the Marine Corps, you have these like rules and there's like, okay, some rules you don't have to follow, but other ones you do. And like when you're going to the field and he's a prior enlisted guy, so he knows, he's like, I'm not going to run out of water and this thing's just weighing me down. So it makes sense to dump them. But it's like, no, they want you to carry the weight because that's what they're testing you on. You know, it's like, I can understand why you would do it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. From my perspective, for the enlisted guys, honestly, it was like, they didn't focus so much on the integrity. As a matter of fact, we developed sort of like this, we called it the Lance Corporal Underground. So almost criminal behavior to get things done. So, I was a platoon sergeant or interim platoon sergeant at one point, and I had a scrounger. You always had a scrounger that could appropriate things for you. But what was the most valuable thing you took away from like OCS and TBS and infantry officer course?
Well, that's a lot of schooling in there. I will say at OCS, because I mean, OCS is just, it's just to see if you can be a Marine. Yeah, that's what it is. It's highly disciplined. Can you do things as a team? Can you, all that kind of good stuff. TBS is a unique place. It's a 6-month course. So when you go in on the officer side, generally speaking, you're either going to be an air contract, a ground contract, or a law contract. So I'd say our TBS class is about 205, and these are rough numbers, but they're close enough. I'd say we had 5 international officers. You have about 5 or 6 lawyers, and they've all gone to law school. They're usually first lieutenants and captains because their law school time counts as time and grade. Yeah. And then as soon as they're done with TBS, they go to the JAG school, and then they just become attorneys. And then there's about 40 or 45 flight contracts, and they all have to get their civilian pilot's license, and then they go down to flight school, and then they're going to find out what airframe they fly. So the remaining 150 of us are all ground contracts, and there's about 23 different MOSs, and it's a 6-month school, so right around the end of month 5, that's when you do MOS selection. And so they tell you how many slots there are. So I said there's about 150 of us. There was 28 slots for infantry, 18 for artillery, like 1 for tanks, 3 or 4 for AAVs,
Nobody
20 logistics officers.
I'm kidding.
We just don't have many of them or any anymore.
Yeah.
And, like 18 comm officers and 6 aviation maintenance officers, all that. So it ended up being, by the time we did MOS selection, I think 29 of us had infantry as our number 1, and they had 28 slots. And so I was fortunate enough to get one of them. And I remember one of the commanding officers at OCS, he said, you're going to spend 90% of your time on 10% of your Marines.
Yep.
And that ratio has played over and over in my head in so many different scenarios throughout life. And that's definitely one thing I remember.
That is so true.
TBS is, it's kind of your first indoctrination into the Marine Corps. You're finally an active duty Marine. You live on a base, but you're in a school where it's all lieutenants. So they kind of expect you to act like leaders, but you're all the lowest ranking people there,
Right.
So it's definitely a good place to learn a lot. But for me, when I went to the infantry officer course in early 2004, the timing of it is also part of it, right? So while I'm at the basic school from April to October of 2003, the invasion is now pretty much, invasion ended in April, and then Marines were kind of pulled out of Iraq for the most part. And then in the fall of 2003, the insurgency really starts to build up. And then I'd gone through the martial arts instructor course, and then we start the infantry officer course in January of 2004. And now it's like Marines are going back. There's a big insurgency. There's these things called IEDs. There's ambushes. There's, all that going on. So by the time IOC started in January of 2004, it felt everything was raised up a level. It's like every single one of you is going to be in combat probably before the year's over.
Wow.
If you think about the peacetime Marine Corps, to get on a MEU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, that's kind of America's 911 force that's on a bunch of Navy ships throughout the world. And kind of in case something bad happens, they're there to respond quickly. More often than not, they do humanitarian operations, or at least that's the that's the MEU I did when there's landslides, earthquakes, or things like that. So peacetime Marine Corps, you want to get on a MEU because that's like your only chance of actually being operational and kind of doing something out in the world. And then now nobody wanted to get on a MEU because that meant you weren't going to Iraq or Afghanistan. So going to IOC, it was, and you're with all the guys that wanted to be infantry officers, right? Yeah. And we all know, we've all seen the same movies. We know how second lieutenants are received when they check in, and like, we're all about to go to combat. So this is going to be a steep learning curve.
Right.
But I will say it not only was the intensity was there, but they also treated us like adults at the infantry officer course. At TBS, it was very much, and there's a reason they treat us like that. We're brand new second lieutenants, your first job in the military, in the Marine Corps. It's a very kind of structured place. I didn't find it very enjoyable. And then it's the infantry officer course. It's like, okay, big boy rules. You don't have to ask permission to talk every time. Just ask your question. It was just, everything became more serious. And, now we're starting to get intel updates, like from Iraq, like here's what's going on. And, we'll have some speaker come in and they're just giving us the intel update, and we go to ask questions, and we'll say something like, so if we're on patrol and we get ambushed and we're taking rounds, but the guys shooting at us are hiding behind women and kids, like, what do we do? Like, how do we deal with this? Yeah. And the guy's like, when you find an answer to that, you tell me.
Yeah.
Like, so
that's awesome.
So
glad he said that.
But the infantry officer course was great. The Marines I went through it with, I'm still in touch with a lot of them today. Oddly enough, I ran into one of them at the Marine Corps birthday about a week ago, and I haven't seen him since IOC. And it was great to see him.
Oh, but you're like, hey, we look like our dads now.
Yeah. And so it was a great school to go to. The captain instructors, the sergeants, the staff sergeants, they took their job seriously. We knew they took their job seriously as instructors. We took our job seriously as students. And it was a really good learning environment. Yeah. And I really enjoyed that course and learned a lot. You had asked about some like highlights from the training. And obviously there's a whole lot of learning that happens in all these different schools. But I remember one night we were going to the range and we were learning how to zero again, it's probably a newer piece of equipment now, but it was a PEC-2 back then, which is like an infrared laser that is attached to the M16. And when you put your night vision goggles on, you just have to zero the laser to where your weapon's pointing, and you can keep your night vision goggles on, and it looks pretty cool. And it's, you're using infrared lasers to
is that little engage the square box like that sits on the front of your? I've always wondered that because we didn't have that when I was in, so that's cool. Yeah. I've always wondered how you guys shot with NVGs on, because
it's that. Yeah. So I remember just throughout that training evolution, they're like, we say we own the night, but the reality is we don't, unless you often trained for it. And so what they said to us, they're like, keep your night vision goggles on the entire time. You have to get used to it. Your neck muscles have to get used to carrying the extra weight. You got to learn how to load ammo into your mag, change magazines, do all your basic things. And just the more you do anything, the better you get at it.
Yeah.
And when it comes to like training and all that, let's just do it. Let's figure it out. Let's practice it. And the first time we do anything, we're probably not going to be great at it, but the more you keep trying, the better you're going to get. And I just remember that as like kind of a light bulb going off type of moment. And there was also, I remember one of the ranges we did early on, And there were some parts of IOC, I'm like, I can't believe they're paying us to do this. This is so much fun. Like, there was one range, and we were throwing grenades and firing AT4s.
Oh.
And that was just a range.
Yeah.
It was just fun. So the scenario is you're a fire team over here, and you got 2 guys throwing grenades, 2 guys launching AT4s. The objective is here. You're being suppressed from here. Whatever the scenario is, you had to kind of like low crawl from one area to another, throw grenades at these targets, and launch AT4s. So as we're getting ready to do this, and this is probably like the first week of IOC, we're just getting because we're still in the TBS mindset of just asking permission a lot. And we go to the captain like, okay, so should we charge the AT4 before we go? Should we pull the thumb clips now? Should we this? And he's like, you're going to be platoon commanders in like 2 months. You know what to do. Figure it out.
That's
I was like, all right. No, good point.
That's cool.
And so I just remember some of the significant parts of like, you were at the basic school. You learned some basic live fire stuff, tactics and all that. That this is the big boys club. You know, we're firing live ammo. You know what you're doing. You're going to be in charge of people real quickly.
That's cool.
So execute. If you make a mistake, learn from it. So I thought they were great schools, and I thought the instructors were great. And yeah, they were great experiences.
That's cool. So then you get orders to 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. And just for housekeeping, in the Marines, we just use terms like 1-8. That means 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. So from here on out, we'll just say 1-8 or 3-4 or 3-1 or any unit designated. But so you got orders to 1-8. What was it like checking in as an officer?
So I am aware that checking in as an officer is going to be different than checking in out of SOI when you're a PFC. However, no one at the battalion was really there. It was a Friday afternoon, and there was a mandatory fun Saturday the following day. It was like field day games. Not like field day cleaning the barracks, like field day in middle school type games. It was like Dizzy Bat and like relay races and things like that. So we checked in the battalion. The ADJ was the only guy there. And we checked into him, and he just told us, it looks like we're going to Iraq, and here's the AO we're going to be in. And then that was it. It was kind of like we left. It was really anticlimactic. And then the following Saturday, we're in like shorts and T-shirts out in the field and just doing like silly games. It was actually kind of a good way to meet everybody.
That's cool.
But yeah, so checking in was fairly uneventful.
That answered one of my questions. You knew when you checked in you were going to Iraq, so that kind of puts.
Oh, at IOC, they let everyone know. They're like, you're going to 1-8, you'll be in Iraq in June. 1-6, you'll be in Afghanistan in July.
Oh, wow.
Some of the guys were going to 3-8, and at the time, 3-8 was doing humanitarian operations in Haiti, or peacekeeping ops, whatever the terminology of the time was.
Meals on Wheels.
But some guys left IOC and checked in to 3-8. One of the guys who was in our IOC class, Mike Felsberg, he was a prior enlisted guy and active duty, 4-year 0311 sergeant, just a stud guy. Of course, he ran 3 miles in like 15 minutes or something absurd.
He's those guys.
Yeah, he's one of those guys. Anyway, because he was a prior enlisted guy, he was supposed to go to LAR. And being like a straight leg infantryman, he's like, I really want to ride in a vehicle this go around. But there was a lieutenant from a battalion in Iraq who'd been killed, and they needed a replacement. So about halfway through IOC, they told Mike, sorry, you're not going to LAR anymore. They need you at, and I don't remember the battalion, but he was in Ramadi, I believe. And he got killed a few months later. So everyone in IOC, you knew what battalion you were going to.
Wow, that answered my question there. Now, after you checked in, you had your field day, when was like the first meeting where you get to meet leadership and they start talking, all right, boys, here we go. This is what we're doing. How did that play out? Did the battalion commander have all you together and say, hey, all right, gather round, kids?
He would, information came in slowly, bit by bit over time. It was, there were like a pre-deployment brief before we went, but as far as what we were doing, we really didn't get a whole lot of detail until we got in country. And mostly because I just don't think they kind of knew, and I'm not trying to say that in a negative way about our battalion or regimental leadership. I think we were pretty new to Iraq at the time. You have this growing insurgency, trying all these different tactics and techniques and procedures, and we're just assigned these areas, trying to play the whack-a-mole game that we played in Iraq for about 8 years. So when we got in country, and every area in Iraq is probably dealing with a different problem. Baghdad was different than Fallujah, was different than Ramadi, was different than Al-Qaim. So finally you get in country, and then you do this. The appropriate term is called a RIP, a relief in place, and you transfer of authority. And ideally, it's about a 2-week period of turnover where, so I would have a partner platoon in 3-4, and me, the platoon sergeant, the squad leaders, we would go out on a mission with them and set up a vehicle checkpoint or doing a convoy from here to there.
Okay.
And so we would just kind of see how they did mission planning, how they prepped the vehicles, how they loaded each vehicle, where were the crew serve weapons, where do you have your corpsmen, just kind of seeing how they did things. Mm-hmm. And then the following week, it's the opposite. We're doing the mission, but their leadership is coming with us and just kind of keeping an eye on us as we do certain things. And after 2 weeks, that turnover is pretty much done. And then you're just kind of the latest intel reports, and you're trying to, build relations, patrol this area. No one's been here before. Mm-hmm. Just go out there and see how people in the town are doing. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, the area we were in was very peaceful. So our AO for the whole battalion stretched from just north of the Haditha Dam in Haditha and went to the big airbase Al-Assad a little south of that. So in between that area of Iraq. And then our company was assigned an area right in the middle of it called ASP Wolf. If you type ASP Wolf in Google Maps, I don't think anything's going to come up. But that's what we called it. Mm-hmm. And so an ASP, for the listeners, is an ammunition supply point. So every military in the world, they don't just have their ammunition randomly placed in places. It's a very specific area. It's well guarded. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of Saddam Hussein's ammunition storage facilities. And so I heard that the U.S. Army, when they took that area over, they hired some civilian contractors to blow up all these artillery shells and rockets and ammunition. And apparently when they detonated the explosive to destroy all of Saddam's ordnance, it didn't really destroy it. It just kind of blew it up and out. So there was now a 3-mile area by 5 miles of just unexploded ordnance that isn't really stable.
Mission accomplished.
So
we're going to chow.
So in this area, we had to kind of just patrol that area to make sure that no insurgents are coming to take all these artillery shells laying around and all these random explosives to use them as IEDs. Turns out there was a village, I don't know, a few clicks away, and the village elder was a guy named Jobber. So we called it Jobber's Village. Again, you type that into Google Maps. I don't think it's going to pop up. But
his call sign was Jobber the Hutt. I'm kidding. I don't know anything about that.
So Jobber had lost one of his legs in the Iran-Iraq war and was walking around with this really crappy old cane. And our corpsman gave him a set of crutches, and he just loved us.
Wow.
So he invited all the Marines to have dinner in his village, and we had about 40 of us go, and this will be a good story. Again, this is very early on, and I know we'll get to Fallujah here shortly, but like the first several months of Iraq, we did kind of stuff like this. So we were maintaining a good relationship with this guy Jobber in his village. He invites us, everyone there, to have dinner. And so we're all sitting down on the blankets inside this tent, and they just are putting out plates of food, and it's naan and beans and rice and some form of lamb, and it actually doesn't taste bad at all. And we've been eating pretty much a lot of MREs, so any change to that was nice.
Nice.
And so on one side of all the carpet that we're all sitting on are all the Iraqi men in Jobber's village, and then on this side of the carpet is all the Marines. And we don't speak Arabic, and none of the Iraqis speak English, but we do have the interpreter at the head of the carpet. And we're trying to break the ice here. Like, what are we going to talk about? And so one Marine blurts out, "What's it like having multiple wives?" And so our company commander just like puts his head, he's like, Jesus. And then so he gets the interpreter, ask him. And so the interpreter says something in Arabic, and then one of the Iraqis responds, and all the Iraqis laugh. And we're like, oh, what'd he say? Then the interpreter turns to us. He's like, multiple wives. I can barely handle the one I have,
Great.
And then all the Marines laugh. So it was a good icebreaker in our winning the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people.
Man, I was like, they're all like, hey, we're all the same, bro. It's she's mad.
Yeah. So you kind of see that in all the interacting with the locals is that they'll have like some kids running around and they tell the kids to get over here and the kids don't pay attention. And then the Marines are like, I got a son too. He isn't listening to me either. There's just the same bonds that we all have. And so this guy Jobber, he proposed an idea to us. He's like, I could use that metal in that field of unexploded ordnance. There's a lot of metal out there would you mind if I came in and got some of that metal? Because I could sell it for scrap and make a lot of money.
Oh, that's cool.
And we're like, yeah, but those are explosives. So
you only got one leg, Jobber. You don't want to lose
yeah.
You don't want to lose.
Oh no, he was old. He was sending his minions, all the younger Iraqis. And we said, well, if you bring a truck in to pull metal out, we're going to have to inspect everything. We can't have any of the explosives. He's like, I don't want the explosives. I just want the metal. So we kind of had this little crack deal going on with a local Iraqi. And we never had any issues. We didn't get hit with IEDs. No one attacked our base. No one. And I'm not saying it's solely because of Jobber, but within the insurgency, a lot of the locals liked us. Whenever we came around, we got invited to a lot of meals. They seemed grateful that we were there.
That's cool.
But at the same time, I feel like by us, they know that we're eventually going to leave. And some of the insurgents might be Iraqis, although every time we came across a live insurgent, they weren't Iraqis.
Oh, yeah.
Every time.
Yeah.
And so basically helping Jobber get rich, I think, was one reason why we might not have been attacked. I'm not saying it's the sole reason. It might not have even been a factor, but I am saying having a good relationship with that guy and keeping money in his pocket, right. I wouldn't have been surprised if he knew the insurgents. I'm just paying him off, like, leave these guys alone. They're making me some money. Yeah. So again, that's just an opinion. I don't have a whole lot of data to back that up, but that's just my experience being there.
I can't help but think that the Lance Corporal Underground probably got some of that money too. So
good for them, man. I got no problems with a Lance Corporal making some money.
What are you going to do with all that Iraqi money? I don't know.
He's going to buy a car. That's exactly what he's going to do.
Mustang, 24% interest. So that's you just got in country. You've been operating for a few months there. Now, just to back up, you graduated at IOC in January, right?
No, I went to IOC in January, graduated in April.
Oh, so you were deploying pretty much right after you got to the unit.
Yeah, 2 months. Yeah, so I'll back that up. So graduated IOC, went home, grabbed my stuff, and then did the drive down to Camp Lejeune, and we all checked in that Friday afternoon, which was at some point the end of April. And then I left for Iraq June 22nd. So about a week after I got there, we did our first field op. And that was it was about 10 days in Southern California, the desert of Southern California. It was an area that they called Matilda Village that I believe was like quarantined old Air Force officer housing. And we just treated that like it was an Iraqi village. And they had a bunch of Marines on terminal leave. They got recalled back to be the aggressors, to act as the Iraqis. And it was a good field op because you're in a fairly urban environment and you're setting up vehicle checkpoints. You're getting intel. You have to go raid that house, or you get intel that you have to check on this person, but then you get ambushed from across the street or something like that. So I thought the training was pretty good. I mean,
that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, everything, the Marine Corps training is really just like, we're going to try and prepare you for the worst possible thing that could happen, which is great training to do. So we did that for about 10 days. And that was, your first field op with the platoon. And my platoon sergeant was a great guy, Tom Scudder. And he was just a good guy to work with and learn to, I felt like the relationship I had with the squad leaders and the platoon sergeants and platoon sergeant and all that went well. They were all combat vets, all the NCOs. They'd all been in the invasion. Yeah. For the most part, they were on the MEU and got called into Mosul. They weren't part of the march up, but they still had their combat action ribbons. They'd been over there.
Right.
And when they found I was kind of willing to listen to them, I think we had just a really good working relationship because they care about the Marines in their team. They care about the Marines in their squad, Doc doesn't want to see these new guys get shot up, So it was a good environment because everyone took it seriously and cared about their job. And as long as you didn't act like it was all about you, it was a good environment to be in.
That's cool. Yeah. That answered the question about meeting your platoon. I was wondering about that.
So I'll go into that. So yeah, that's definitely like the butterflies in your stomach moment of just don't fuck this up, like don't give them a shitty lieutenant story, So I kept it brief. It was like, nice to meet you. Here's where I'm from. And well, one thing I did want to differentiate was like there were a couple of corporals in the platoon that weren't holding billets, and there were 2 lance corporals that were team leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And so after I spoke to the platoon, I asked to have a separate meeting with just the team leaders and the squad leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And for the Lance Corporal team leaders, it was like, you may not be an NCO, but you're filling an NCO billet. So I expect you to act like one. But at the same time, I want your opinion on things. You're a team leader for a reason. So I want to be there to be a clear distinction between the team leaders and the squad leaders and how we're going to, manage this platoon.
That's cool. That's good leadership.
So yeah,
I mean,
Oh.
It's like you just come in and say, hey, you want to hear from him. So that's, man, as soon as you did that, I know all the enlisted guys were like, all right, this guy's cool.
I think they see you talking to the platoon sergeant a lot. And I think that goes like a long way. Just to like, okay, at least he's talking to the most experienced guy here. And I always felt that like officers are not like specialists in anything. They're just kind of like this jack of all trades. Like at IOC, we'll do like a range with the sniper rifles, and then we'll talk to the snipers and talk about planning. But I'm not a good sniper. I just was told by a bunch of sniper NCOs, here's the capabilities and limitations. Here's a great way to incorporate it into an assault or a defensive position. So I just felt like my job is to make the best decision. The more informed I am, the better decisions I'm going to make. And having a good group of NCOs that I trust and all the attachments of mortarmen, machine gunners, assaultmen, snipers, all of them, and just kind of all of them are just a wealth of information. And then when you get that type of feedback, that helps me in planning, the overall,
that's cool.
What the platoon's supposed to do.
That's cool. So it sounds like you're talking about something and one of the Marines might be like, well, hey, sir, we can't do that because XYZ. Sounds like you were taking that kind of feedback from them.
Yeah, so anytime, and specifically like into Fallujah, when it comes like, okay, we're in this building, we have to get to that building over there. I'm thinking this, snipers and machine gunners, what is the best position for you guys to provide overwatch for us? We're moving down this street, And then they're like, this would be good if we could be here or here. And that's like, okay, third squad, do you think you can support the machine gunners getting here? And it was just like, very much it was like the platoon's brain trust. There were about 50 of us in the platoon as we went through the city. And, it's not like me and 50 lance corporals, like there's a lot of different capabilities with different weapons and different people. And just, you kind of had that brain trust of like 8 people kind of deciding what the platoon's going to do. And that also helps because when you do get into the fight or you do get ambushed, there's a bunch of people throughout the platoon that know what the overall mission is, right? It's not like I have all the answers, I'm keeping everyone else in the dark. It's like, no, like the 9 of us have decided what we're going to do, and this is how we're moving. Here's how we're going to shoot, move, and communicate while we're taking this objective or responding to this enemy ambush or whatever. So yeah, it was that the platoon brain trust, I'd say, was good.
So you're in Iraq at this point. You're around Haditha Dam area, ASP, Wolf.
Yep.
When did Fallujah get on your radar?
So throughout the summer, so got in country end of June. We're pretty much operating on our own by the beginning of July. And it was a lot of convoys. We did do a few raids on suspected positions, but no shots fired. There was a couple cities that we were part of a major assault on. One was the city of Hit, and the other one, I believe, was called Rawa. I wasn't at the Rawa one. I had to stay back. My platoon stayed back and guarded ASP Wolf when that assault happened. But when we went into the city of Hit, the intel told us that, the insurgents had taken over the town. They murdered all the cops. The mayor's dead. We're going in to retake that city. The insurgents hold that city. And so we had planned for this operation for days. We all get to Al-Assad. We move out early in the morning. It's now like 03 or something. And we're moving up to the city. And we're looking at the city, and they told us there was no electricity. We were basically told the city had been destroyed by the insurgents. They was taking it over. And we're looking at the city, all the street lamps are on. And we're looking at the buildings, and back to that PEC-2 we were talking about. If you fire that PEC-2, the infrared laser, if you fire it into a building, all the infrared rays bounce around, and you can see the inside of that room. So you could be a few hundred yards away, you fire your PEC-2 into a dark building, and all of a sudden you could see inside. So we all got our PEC-2s, and like, there's no one here. There's no one in these buildings. And I remember going to Sergeant Wells. I'm like, Sergeant Wells, didn't they say all the electricity in the city was shut off? I'm like, because maybe I heard it wrong,
Right.
but maybe I'm misremembering a part of the intel brief. And Sergeant Wells just shakes. He's like, yes, sir. There's supposed to be no power in the city, and all the lights are on. So anyway, not much happened. We went and we cleared our part of the city. We were told it would take 2 or 3 days. And by the end of the first day, they're like, yeah, we're good. We installed a new police chief, new mayor. We're good. We can leave now.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of this big buildup to kind of nothing.
Mm.
And the whole summer was a lot of that, of constant like build up. It's going to be this big operation. You get some intel reports from Fallujah because there was always a lot of combat around Fallujah and Ramadi. But it kind of felt like, in a way, yeah, we're in Iraq, we're in a war zone, but it still feels like another world away.
Mm-hmm.
Like none of us, there's been no firefights here. There's been no IEDs. There hasn't been much going on. We're interacting with Iraqis. We're going to lunches with these people. We've apprehended a couple guys, but who knows if they ended up being, they were just doing something suspicious. So we apprehended them, turned them into the intel guy. So we were always busy and we were doing stuff, but it didn't necessarily feel like what we were doing was really part of the war effort,
Right.
So I say all that because all those missions we prepared for, we did a lot of rehearsals. We did a lot of training for them. At that ASP, I mean, we were really in the middle of nowhere. So we set up our own ranges. So we were kind of bored. So we set up live fire ranges. And then we even just took some plywood and built like these makeshift houses and put targets up and practice room clearing. And I mean, it was, you always want to keep up your training, but I think it was also to minimize the boredom.
Right.
So I do feel like our first 3 months in Iraq was kind of like it was like a good training op, for lack of a better term. You're out in the field, you're living together, it was just a really good training op.
Right.
And then so by the time we went down to Fallujah, we were, for lack of a better term, a well-oiled machine. I've talked to so many other like grunt type people, and when you put night vision goggles on, it's awesome, but it doesn't always have the resolution of your actual vision.
No depth
And
perception.
so and when you're walking, or when you're patrolling as a platoon at night with night vision goggles on, everyone kind of looks the same, but who every single person is, because of the weapon they're carrying, where they carry their grenades, the type of pack they have, how they walk, things like,
Yep.
yeah. So it just looks like 50 of the same blobs, but every single person. So that, I say that because that's indicative of a platoon that knows how to work together and has the experience of being around each other and just operating. So I think a lot of our success in Fallujah was because we had 3 months of doing convoys, and we did assault a city, and we did raid a few houses. And because I think that was instrumental to our success in the city.
Yeah, that's fortuitous. Yeah, because I was thinking that you did not have like a full 6-month workup before you go to Iraq, and you got there. So man, 3 months to really gel. That's cool.
Yeah.
So you hear about Fallujah, and you're going to be replacing, what was it, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, 3-4?
We did that relief in place with 3-4 when we got in country in June.
Okay.
That was the right seat, left seat that we did.
Got it.
With them, and they were all part of the first Fallujah. So clearly we were in awe of them. And then they were good to us when we turned over, I mean, it wasn't like, we've been here, you're the new guys, you haven't done anything. It wasn't like that at all.
That's
they were
cool.
all very professional, told us what they did, what they thought worked, what didn't, good techniques they had. And they just seemed happy to go home, frankly. And I can't blame them.
Right.
But they were good. And then, so like I said, there was always kind of like these build up to like these big operations, and then they just never really materialized. And then, so I'd say probably mid-October, they start saying there's going to be a big op in Fallujah. It's like, yeah, we've heard that before.
Right.
Sure. I'll pack my bags. I'll wait a minute before I pack everything, And then finally it started coming, and then there was the order. All right, the whole company's loading up in 7 tons, and we're leaving on this day. And everyone's like, no way, we're really going. And then even when you get to Camp Fallujah, right, and they say, okay, Bravo Company, you guys are going to be in these buildings and you hang out here. I mean, even half the company was like, this assault ain't happening, And so, but again, we always prepared for it. We always took our mission seriously. Part of General Mattis's, he had his flat ass rules that he had for all Marines in country. And one of them was you had to do rehearsals before you went on every mission. So even though it was mind numbing and it was boring, it's good to constantly train because you want to be able to do it when you're tired, when you're hungry, and you've done it so many times you can do it in your sleep.
Right.
So every time a vehicle convoy stopped and you dismounted, it was 5-meter checks and 20-meter checks. And the reason for that is that you don't want to stop on a road and have there be a bunch of IEDs there. So as soon as you dismounted, everyone went and did 5 meters outside the vehicle and on both sides of the road. Everyone's doing their surveys. Anyone see anything, tripwires, fuses sticking out of the ground, landmines, whatever, anything that looks odd. Okay, now spread out to 20 meters. Give us a little more security. So we were always rehearsing that before we went out on every mission and said, okay, IED hits a third vehicle. What do we do? Okay, well, third vehicle has this. What vehicle is going to be the casualty collection vehicle? Where's the platoon sergeant? Where's the corpsman? So just 3 months of doing stuff like that and constant missions. You know what everyone's thinking. You know what needs to be done. You've just rehearsed a lot. So finally, we do get to Camp Fallujah, probably around Halloween time frame and Camp Fallujah was different. I mean, there were tanks driving around, but I didn't see a tank the whole time I was in country. There wasn't much going on in Haditha. We didn't really need them.
Right.
But yeah, there was tanks driving around there. There was the guys in big beards and civilian clothes, and were they CIA? Were they FBI? Were they, I don't know. Are they Blackwater? There was like, okay, there's some shit going on here.
Right.
And then every once in a while, someone from Fallujah would fire a missile or a rocket in our direction, and then the counter battery artillery would go off. And until you've been around a howitzer going off, you really underestimate how loud that thing is.
Loud,
I mean, yeah. So Fallujah, like, okay, we're in the war now. Okay. Well, I mean, I've been outside the wire, outside Camp Fallujah, and you could tell that this place is the same way like IOC was a big step up from the basic school. Like Camp Fallujah was a real step up from operating in Haditha. And then there was not any really big, like, I'm sure there was a big sand table order by the colonel. I wasn't there for it. And not that he needs to be briefing me. That's why you have a company commander. But I would say our company commander he wasn't beholden to the traditional SMEAC format. And slowly, intel was just slowly coming in day by day. So
well, just interrupt
you kind of just...
so SMEAC, that's the 5-paragraph order. For the listeners, it stands for Situation, Mission, Execution, Administration, Logistics, Command, and Control. It's the book way of issuing an order, getting the troops ready to, hey, we're going to go operate here. So that's SMEAC. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I never really got a SMEAC for the Battle of Fallujah from the CO because, it was just kind of like slow intel was coming in. Where are we going to be at what time? And then I got told, 3rd Platoon, you're taking the cultural center. And then that was our first major objective. That was the company's first objective. That was on phase line Cathy. So should we explain phase lines real quick?
So, well, backing up a little bit, where was Camp Fallujah? Was it north of Fallujah? Where were you?
I believe it was due east about 2 miles of the city.
Got it. Okay. So it was
maybe a little more Middle West, but it's due east.
So it was like a tent city with guards and stuff around it? Is that how?
There was a bunch of buildings that were already there. Like, I don't know if it was like an Iraqi army thing, but there were a bunch of big, long buildings, almost kind of like squad bays. And, 1st Platoon was in that one, 2nd Platoon's in that one, 3rd Platoon's in that one. The company COC is here. Charlie Company's over here. There was just a bunch of rows of them.
Right.
I'd almost like to speak to whoever was planning the logistics to Camp Fallujah, because someone just said to him, we're bringing 10,000 more troops here, like food, sanitation, ammo, figure it out, and they just had to accommodate, tens of thousands of troops and trucks and fuel ammo and batteries and porta-johns and all that stuff that comes along with, just that's what, thousands of people need to live.
It's a Herculean effort. But as part of the planning, you said you wanted to talk about the phase lines. So talk about the military planning and how they go through phase lines and creating all of that information.
So instead of calling the streets their actual name, they set up our own terminology for it that's pretty simple to follow. So from north to south, they'll set up a bunch of east-west lines, and they name them just phase lines. So when you say, okay, our unit has crossed phase line Adam, the people back in the command center know exactly where you are, but if any enemy is intercepting your communications, they're like, what the hell's phase line Adam? You know what I mean? So that, again, it's common military practice to use your own terminology in case someone else is hearing what you're saying.
Right.
And so for simplicity, all the east-west lines were phase line. It was alphabetical in women's names. And then the other phase lines that went north-south were all men's names that went A to Z or whatever, and then the north to south names. So I forget phase line A and B, but phase line C was Kathy, and that was like a big 6-lane highway that ran east to west in Fallujah. And then you went down a couple more streets, you had phase line Fran. That was another big 6-lane highway that we had to cross. So a lot of just briefs on that, that type of stuff. Like what the main objectives are. Here's the phase lines. Here's where adjacent units are going to be. Here's priority of fires for, artillery, aircraft, all that type of detail.
That sounds a lot like a SMEAC, but just it wasn't
no.
formal. It wasn't.
No, it was over the course of several days. Yeah.
So that's cool. So a lot of planning goes into it. And this is where, like, before I joined the military, you think it's like Rambo and you just show up with guns.
Oh, yeah.
But there's logistics and there's planning. And so there was a ton of planning into Fallujah. And then, so at some point, they told you, hey, we're stepping off. And you'd been assigned, you got the cultural center. Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
How did that play out?
Yeah, I'd say the few days leading up to it, we had spent a lot of time working with AAVs and with tanks. Our first few months in country, it was all just Humvees and 7 tons.
By the way, AAV is a
amphibious assault vehicle. It's a floating armored can that generally takes Marines from much bigger naval vessels out the bottom of the vessel and takes them to the shore. They work on land, they work on water. Not particularly great in either of them, but they can do both. And it's good for troop transport, getting medevacs, things like that. And also just having logistics. We went through a lot of ammo, go through a lot of food, a lot of water. It's not like you can, use the faucet in someone's house in Fallujah. You need bottles of water. There's a lot of people. So AAVs are good for that. And everyone knows what tanks are. So we hadn't really worked with them before. So the days leading up to it, we really kind of learned to appreciate that walking through a city where the insurgents kind of run the place, that's going to be rough. And for a tank going down the street by itself, if they're buttoned up, they can only see, out this hole right here, So tanks have strengths and weaknesses. The infantry has strengths and weaknesses. But if the infantry and the tank work together, it's a pretty powerful combination. Nice. So it was really great to get those couple days of just working with them. And so the morning of November 8th is when we went to the assembly area outside the city.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Cluttered Path. In this installment, we met Chris Wilkens and heard his story about becoming a Marine Corps Infantry Officer, and also the events leading up to Operation Phantom Fury, also known as the Second Battle of Fallujah. In the next episode, we'll get details on the actions of his 3rd Platoon from Bravo Company 1-8 during the battle. Thanks for listening.